Doesn't it seem like as a society we've never been so self-interested? I mean, I don't have the data, but just the amount of self-help, get to know me better resources that are available today. I mean, I don't know if it's because I think it's good. I think the resources are good, but I don't know if it's because we are now more enlightened and therefore more interested in self-actualizing and wanting to grow, or if it's just that we are more narcissistic. I don't know, but I do know that there is this sort of trend towards I want to figure out who I am. And in many ways, that's good. I also think that with social media and access to more channels to distribute information, what happens is you now have a lot of people weighing in on how to best evaluate who you are, how to best grow and develop. Pop Psych, and here's why. It stands for popular psychology, and through YouTube, I will become popular, and I'll be a popular psychologist. I'm David Colarosi. No, it's Dr. David Colarosi. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy and a PhD in counseling psychology.
You are such a genius.
As the cultural zeitgeist shifts towards self-awareness, personal growth, development, it becomes really difficult to control for quality. I think this is true if you look at, books that are on the market right now, podcasts, YouTube channels, life coaches, the rest of it. There's no barrier to entry, and so it becomes difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff. In one space that I think that's particularly true is the world of personality assessments, which is why we're doing this video. I want to talk about the Enneagram because that's the assessment that seems to be getting the most steam right now. There seems to be the most support from life coaches, personal development authors, etc.
So Enneagram is a personality test that has been around since ancient Greece. It will blow your freaking mind.
So the Enneagram names for you what is your weakest point, and at the very same time, potentially teaches you how to overcome that weakness.
There are 9 basic personality types in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to feel safe and cope in the world.
I went on a little bit of a hunt to understand why I do the things I do, why I felt the way I was feeling. I had a sense of underfulfillment inside of me, and that led me into having a conversation around something like an Enneagram.
So all the cool people are in on the Enneagram. Kind of anybody who's anybody in personal development. But you know who's not in on the Enneagram, or at least who doesn't seem to be very vocal about it? Academics, psychologists, researchers. So what's going on here? I believe that Rachel Hollis and Jen Hatmaker and Dave Hollis and the rest, I believe that they really feel like the Enneagram has changed their life. I think they really believe that it has accurately described them. So if they're not aligned, what's creating the disconnect? Why do they like it so much and maybe academics don't? So let's put our skeptical hats on here. There is a cognitive bias called the Barnum effect, which leads people to believe, or to rate rather, descriptions of their personality as accurate if they are told that they are tailored and specific to them. The Barnum effect is the reason why, in my opinion, astrology exists. If I write a paragraph describing your personality and I tell you that I've tailored it to you specifically, and yet I use vague enough language so that it could apply to anybody, when you interpret that data, that paragraph, you're going to go, oh my God, that does fit me. That does describe me. So there's a lot of studies about, what if we give somebody a different, we give a group of people all with different personalities. What if we give them the same description of their personality? How will they rate it? And they will all say, oh my God, yeah, I can relate to that piece of it. It's the Barnum effect. So to evaluate the Enneagram, you have to understand that it's not just an assessment. The Enneagram is a model or a theory of personality. The tools, the tool called the Enneagram, there's actually several different assessments that are used to measure the Enneagram. So when Rachel Hollis says, the Enneagram has changed my life, what she's really referring to is the theory of personality. So before we go further on the Enneagram, I should at least acknowledge that I'm probably biased against it because it's not the model I was taught when I was in school. The model I was taught is called the Big Five model of personality, which is definitely the best in class, most widely accepted model of personality. The Big Five model evaluates personality across 5 traits: extroversion, agreeableness, openness to experience, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. Those are the 5 kind of components or traits that make up somebody's personality. And if you think about those 5 traits, you might go, well, David, why are those 5 traits any better? Why is that model any better than another model, the Enneagram model? And this is why I think the Big 5 model is so valuable. The Big 5 model of personality was finalized in the 1970s, but research on this topic had been going on for decades, all the way back to the late 1800s. Researchers were trying to figure out what is this thing that is personality? How do we describe it? And so what they started doing was creating massive taxonomies of personality traits, and then use different statistical methods, most often factor analysis, to boil those traits down into key factors. And that was done over and over and over again from the late 1800s throughout the 20th century to arrive at these 5 global factors. And what's really important about it, the key takeaway is that the research was unbiased. It was done by independent researchers. It was very systematic and totally reproducible. You can do the same process today and you will arrive at those same 5 factors. So now contrast that with the Enneagram's origin story, which was created in the we're not sure exactly when it was created. It was sort of originally, so the guy that created it is named Oscar Ichazo. This is back in the 1950s. He said, here is a sort of finalized version of the Enneagram model. And he was a Bolivian philosopher, spiritual teacher, kind of a personal development guru, think about it like the old school life coach kind of guy. And one of his students is this guy, Claudio Naranjo. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but he was one of his students. This was a Chilean psychiatrist that taught under Oscar. And he goes, you know what? This is started off in the 1950s and trained under him. In the 1970s, he goes, hey, I can improve upon your Enneagram model, and created a new model of the Enneagram, which was influenced by an even earlier philosopher and mystic named George Goodruff. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. This was a philosopher, a mystic, sort of a spiritual teacher who influenced the thinking of Claudio. So no problem there. You would think that the assessment is evolving, but then Oscar goes, now hold up, I don't like your version of the Enneagram. And he said, my version is the only version of the Enneagram, and I created it all by myself. So kind of back off, we don't share ideas here. The problem is that everybody on the outside kind of knew, this is everybody on the outside knew that Oscar hadn't really created it independently. Oscar was influenced, sorry, I don't have enough hands here. Oscar was influenced by a Christian mystic from the 4th century named Evagrius Ponticus. And so the idea, here's the bottom line, we have no idea how the Enneagram was developed. But let's ignore that piece. I mean, do you really care how a model of personality was developed? You should care how the model was developed, but let's just say for our purposes that we didn't care. On the positive side, the assessment does it's cool. The language is kind of unique. It's got a mystical vibe to it. They've got they give you your basic personality. They talk a lot about the unconscious or the subconscious. Your strengths and weaknesses tied to that, and kind of the different ways in which your emotions or your thoughts or your intuition are going to influence you. It's unique. It's not straightforward, which I think makes it fun. The challenge is for me that all of the variables there make interpretation or accurate interpretation pretty difficult. So here's what the Enneagram Institute says about interpretation. Each of the personality types embodies a wide range of behaviors and attitudes. Each of the types can be seen as a metaphor or symbol of the full range of human potential. Seen in this way, the 9 personality types of the Enneagram are psychological functions or domains of an archetypal power or capacity of human nature. One reason we are all similar is that all 9 functions operate in each of us. One reason we are all different is that their proportion and balance within our psyche is different and constantly shifting. I have no idea. I have no idea what that means. But the question is, with that kind of description, with that kind of requirement around interpretation, how do you possibly evaluate whether or not this test is valid? And the answer is you can't, and there is virtually zero data out there proving that the Enneagram is a valid assessment of personality. There's a little bit of data supporting its reliability, meaning if you give this test to somebody now and you give it to them again in a year, they'll probably score similar on the tool. The data is not great there, but good enough. And the validity data is absolutely terrible. What's interesting about it is even proponents of the Enneagram will say, yeah, this is not a super valid assessment. The official stance seems to be, this isn't super scientific, but it's a lot of fun, great for development. So I think if you engage with the Enneagram with that mindset, then I'm okay with it. It falls in the same kind of bucket of assessments as the, what color is your parachute, what's your spirit animal, what's your archetype, what's your whatever, any of those kind of assessments that put you in, oversimplified categories. And that's really my beef with the Enneagram. It's using super vague language and bucketing people into these basic personality traits that I think really ignore the sophistication and the nuance and the complexity that comes with everybody's personality. So on this one, I wouldn't listen to the influencer of the day. I would pay attention to the research and use kind of any other personality assessment. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next week.